It's recording. So, good evening, everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining us. And I am joined tonight by the lovely Liz Scott. And for those of you, if this is the first webinar you've been to, I decided to do these lovely people webinars because there was a time when I thought that the world was a big bad place and full of horrible people who were out to get me. And then I've had a complete change of heart about that, and now I see the world as a very friendly place, and it seems to be full of lovely people. So I thought I would introduce some of these lovely people to each other, really, and sort of get to have a chat between us and talk about what it is that I came across in my life that changed all of that for me, that changed the world from this scary place to being a really beautiful, friendly place. So, and this is the lovely Liz Scott, and she runs a coaching company with her lovely husband, Stu. So, Liz, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and anything, and then I will just jump in and grill you with questions if if that works.
Absolutely, yeah. It's lovely to be here tonight, Debra, so thank you for inviting me. Yeah, so a very potted sort of introduction to myself and Stu. We run something called Coaching Connect, and what we do is we do a lot of work in schools, a lot of work with leaders in schools, and we also run events, and we also support coaches as well. And I would say that we've been coaching in a traditional way probably for the last 10, 12 years. But we came across the principles about 4 years ago, and we're going to talk a bit about the 3 principles in this. But we came across the 3 principles, and our coaching practice and what we deliver has shifted significantly, albeit we're still working with the same client group. And previous to that, I used to work as a BBC radio reporter. So I've had a little bit of a sort of a jumping around career. But what I love at the moment is working with leaders and in education and with people that are inspired by coaching and what coaching can do and provide.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That sounds really interesting. Yeah. So what was it that changed? Because you said, you coached in the traditional way. I mean, obviously, both of us are pointing towards these principles that so if there's people out there that kind of either don't know what it is we're talking about, those principles, or actually sometimes we all talk about these principles in a slightly different way. So I think it's really, really interesting for people to hear your take on it. So what is it that it looked to you that you came across that changed, that swapped your business, change was powerful enough to make you change the way you ran your business?
Well, if anybody is a coach or is a little bit like me, I have spent years and years and years and years in different forms of self-development and personal development, and coaching was a sort of natural progression really for me. So over the years I've done things like neuro-linguistic programming. It's also known as NLP. I've done coaching. I trained as a counselor. I've done a little dabbling with transactional analysis, a little dabbling with EFT, with meditation, mediation. I used to see that my role as a coach was very much to build up my toolbox of techniques and strategies with the idea, I guess, that whatever a client brought to me, I might be able to rummage around in that toolbox and come up, hopefully, with something that could support them. So that was a background that I came from, and I had a lot of what I would call success in that background, but I was mystified because there were some times when I seemed to have an impact with people, and there were some times when I didn't, and I was trying to work out the combination that I was using of tools and techniques and strategies at any one time to see if I could replicate that in the future. So that was the one thing that kind of mystified me. And I remember it really clearly I was with a group of mainly coaches, and we were having an evening out. And one of the things that you talk about when you're coaches is what training are you on, and what books are you reading? Mm-hmm. And I remember a friend of mine, Erica, she said, oh, I've come across something called the 3 Principles. And this was probably about 5 years ago now, I think. And I was absolutely astounded, because I thought I knew everything out there. Or if I hadn't done and trained in it, at least I knew about it.
Knew it existed, yeah.
And I didn't know about the principles. So I said to her, as you do, what are the 3 principles? And she said, mind, consciousness, and thought. And I thought, oh, I'll go and read a book about mind, consciousness, and thought, stick that in my toolbox, and then I've got something else that I can help clients with. And I suppose what's happened for me over the past probably 4 years, because it took about a year, I was just sort of sniffing around YouTube and reading books and all of that. But it's taken about sort of 4 years for all the things that I used to see as ways of connecting with clients, or tools and strategies, they've all kind of just fallen away in a very organic way. And what I've been left with is seeing that the principles and what they're pointing to seems to be the most useful thing that I can point my clients to. So over the last few years, more and more of the tools and techniques and models and theories have just kind of lost their usefulness. And that's all I can say, because they did have their moment in time for me, but it's like I've outgrown them. And I'm very fond. It's almost like looking at my old toys, which I at one time really was very fond of, but now are a bit of a fond memory, and don't seem to hold the same impact for me. And that's the work that we now deliver with the people that we meet up with, leaders and schools, and with coaches as well.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a beautiful explanation. Yeah, how you've come across something that just looks clearer to you, really more powerful to you, and it looks like it supersedes all of those other things that you use. That's lovely. So I know that you and Stu are particularly interested at the moment. I read in your little bio that it says, and I know I've spoken to you about this as well, that going forward you are very, very keen to impact the youth, and you talk about mental illness, and are you talking about stress and depression and things? Can you tell us a little bit about what it is you're trying to do there, and how you think the principles will be able to help in that setting? Because obviously you're kind of talking quite a wide range across here. You're sort of saying that you coach people, and then you're saying these youngsters that are struggling. Is it okay to use this same thing, your principles, for both of these? Will the principles help these young people as well? And how do you see that happening?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one for me, because it's an area that just at the moment, when it comes to young people and mental health, it has a real draw for me at the moment, and I'm not even entirely sure why, because I don't actually know any young people with mental health issues like that. It's made me think I really want to do this. But I think what I realized, because I'm very much around schools and working with teachers and school leaders, is that actually the impact that could be had with mental health is quite large. And and I guess I need to just qualify what I mean by that, because children at the moment, if they're going through the education system, they are under they're in a very different world than when I went through education. And there is a lot of measurement of progress and a lot of our exams, and there's a lot of what seems like pressure from the teachers for them to jump through certain hoops. And also in schools today, when I was going through school, that it seemed much more simple to me that you would go into maybe a traditional career or job. That's how I saw it, and that would be what you did for life. When I was at school, there was no such thing as the internet. The idea that I could speak to you like this on a computer, I mean, we didn't have computers. It's like, it's just a completely different world that I was brought up in, and youngsters of today are brought up in. And one of the things that I've seen from with the principles, and I've seen it for myself, I mean, this is the key, is that I've seen that when, for me, what's happened for me is I've got in touch with something inside me, which is a real core of resilience, which is a real space of groundedness. And I can see from that space how I can also get caught up in lots of stories and angst and worry. But what I really see is that space within me is always there. Now, I've only known that in recent years, like when I came across the principles, and how I wish I'd known that before. Because I can really see that when I was a youngster, or even just a few years ago, is that I would very much get caught up in worry and anxiety. And, you know, when I was working at the BBC, I was on the verge of going off with stress. So I can really see how I got caught up in a lot of anxiety and worry. And the one thing I didn't know, which I now know, is that is temporary, and that the core of who I was, that psychological, resilient, resourceful space within, was actually who I truly am. And I just know that if we could share this with young people, that even if they're going through what seems like pressures and exams and, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend worries and all the stuff that youngsters go through, if despite that rocky terrain, they knew that they were okay, my sense is that would really ease the angst that they go through on their journey. So that's a very long answer. But for me, it just feels as though young people today, if they could see this, it would, you know, if I had seen it sooner, it would have made a huge difference for me. And I guess if we can share this with young people, then my hunch is it's going to make a huge difference for them for the rest of their lives too. So that's why I'm passionate about it. And that's why next year, Stu and I, and it's still an idea at the moment, but we want to run a conference for young people and mental health, and for the services that look after these young people, because they really see that if we can get enough people on board in the Southwest, that there's something very positive that we could do for our young people that could really support them in a place where all the news at the moment is that we're going through a mental health crisis with our young people. So that's what's emerging for me, and I really think that this understanding could make a significant difference.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah, I quite agree. So you said like this was something that you have seen for yourself and you're going to share it with the youth and everything. So if there's people on this call or people listening, you know, and maybe they get a bit anxious sometimes, or they, you know, get into those places where we don't like to be, that sort of thing. How do you share this with people? You know, how you said this was something you have seen for yourself. How can somebody see this for themselves? What, you know, how does that happen? How does that work?
Well, my hunch is that what happened for me is that I just got a sniff of something in the early days, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I remember I came back from doing a training course on the principles. It was a weekend. I say a training course. It was a weekend talking about the principles. And I came back from this, and Stuart didn't know anything really about them. And he could see a difference in me. And he would say, "What are these principles?" And I'd go, "I don't know." but they're really good. I just don't know. I don't know how to explain what they are. I don't know. I can't explain it. And so I guess for the last 4 years, the journey that I've been on is finding a language so that I can share what I see for myself with other people, so that it has the semblance of making sense.
Yeah.
And that's the journey that I've been on. So my hunch is that if somebody is listening and is become curious about principles, it's because there's something inside them that's kind of waking up to I say the truth or the reality of how we actually exist as human beings. And all I would say is just keep in the conversation, in whatever way that seems relevant for you, because it wasn't a blinding flash of lightning for me. I don't know. Do you ever defrost your freezer?
Yes, sometimes, not often enough, but
No, me neither. And mine needs a good defrost. And I know that when like a defrosting of the freezer seems to take an age. And if you leave it, you'll go back there and it's like nothing has happened, and yet you see a few drops of water on the ground. You think, well, something must have happened, and you go back and it's like it just takes forever. And then there's something very satisfying where you kind of hear these like chunks of ice fall off, and you think, it's really happening now. This is great. Well, that's kind of what it's been like with me in this understanding. It's been more of a thaw of what I thought I knew, rather than any massive sort of flash of insight. But it just seems as though I keep finding more and more that's really resonates for me in this area, and I at the moment I just feel very compelled to keep sharing that with the people that I come across, either through work or friends or family, anyone who listens to me, really, in a way that is respectful to them, but also because for me it's made such a difference. I like to share it. And I'm going to this sounds really mundane, but I will just share this because because I was thinking about, like, well, what difference have the principles made for me? How might I describe it? And in the early days, when I came across the 3 principles, I heard about wisdom, and it's like people would talk about wisdom, and that there was wisdom in us all. And I was really curious about this because I thought, what does that mean? So here's a really mundane example of how it showed up for me one day. I was out walking the dog, and when I used to walk the dog, I used to have a very busy head, a very, very busy head. And on this particular dog walk, I was up on Dartmoor, and I was coming up to a place where I knew that the path was going to fork, and I could go left or right, and both would take me home, but they were just over different terrains to get home. And about 10 minutes as I was approaching this path, the fork in the path, I began to start imagining and talking to myself in my head about which direction should I take. Should I go left? Should I go right? And if I go left, well, that'll take me over the stream, and then I've got to go down through that boggy patch, and then I've got to go over the stile, or I could go right, and then got a very sharp, down steep hill there, and then it was like I was like weighing it up like this in my head. Yeah. Shall I go left? Shall I go right? Shall I go left? So this was going on in my head for about 5 minutes, and then I thought, oh, what's this thing called wisdom? I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait until I get to the fork in the path, and then I'm going to wait for wisdom to tell me which way to go. Like, wisdom will tell me to go left or right. So I put out of my head this sort of like, shall I go left, shall I go right, and all of that stuff. And 15 minutes later, I suddenly realized that I hadn't stopped at the fork. I had taken a route. I hadn't even thought about it. And I was traveling down the path without having stopped to wait for wisdom. And it just struck me like, oh, it's like I thought I had to ask for wisdom to kind of intervene, but actually maybe there's something else going on behind the system that is kind of making some of these choices for me. Now, it sounds like a really small thing, but I think that was, talking about the defrosting freezer.
Yeah.
That was maybe a little bit of a chunk of ice that came off there, because I really began to see then as a possibility that maybe I didn't have to think quite so much. It's like maybe all these things, like that was a fork, a real fork in a path, but maybe all these metaphorical forks in the road with my job and my career and conversations I was going to have and people I was going to see, and should I do a website or should I write this? Like maybe I didn't have to do quite so much thinking about it all. And that's one of the things that I put to the test, but it made sense for me to try out. And lo and behold, what I've realized is that 99% of thinking that I thought I needed to do to keep myself on track was completely unnecessary. And it seems to me, the more that I tune into, for want of a better word, this wisdom, it's like there seems to be something else going on. And the impact for me, in a very simple way, is that my head has got a lot less going on moment to moment than it used to. It's almost like maybe I don't have to plan my life to the nth degree, because maybe it's all at some level. I say it's planned out for me, but maybe it's not on me to make every single right decision. So that's one of the big impacts for me is, well, on dog walks, I don't chunter in my head quite so much, which is very nice because I see the view. But also in life as well, I find that I don't try and work things out in with such the same intensity as I used to. And it just means that I kind of relax and enjoy the ride of life much more. So that's maybe just one way of describing it.
That was really beautiful. I really like that. And I can see, and one of the things, since I've come across this understanding, one of the things that I've seen is those really ordinary things that look different to us. Because, I've spoken to a few people since I've been doing these webinars, and I've had people that have gone into a very deep spiritual place with this, and then then people talking about really ordinary things, and I just love that kind of how strong the connection between those two things are, because it looks as if they're two totally different, when we're talking about this woo-woo spiritual stuff, that something within, and yet my experience has been that looking in that direction, looking at what is behind life, what is this spiritual stuff that these people talk about, what does that mean? And I feel very normal and ordinary and human, and we're kind of talking about in this kind of way, and yet what I have really seen is by looking at that, and I don't feel like I will ever really understand it or know much about it, but the tiny little bit that I get when I look in that direction changes the most ordinary things in my life that look important to me, like how I parent, how my relationships are. And like you say, when you're going out for a walk, and wouldn't it be nice to just have a clear head and relax and enjoy the walk? Those things that we maybe don't even know that are important to us, but actually they make such a difference in our day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience of life. It just gets lighter and easier and nicer somehow.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I really see that. And I love what you're saying there about spirituality, because for me, for many years, I was raised as a Christian, but for me, spirituality is slightly different than maybe as I understood or was brought up to understand Christianity. And in recent years, before I came across the principles, I would say I was a spiritual seeker. I really wanted to be enlightened, right? And I really thought if I read enough books, and if I meditated enough, or did whatever seemed to be the thing that I was reading or looking at the time, that I would kind of grind my way closer to being spiritual, or having a spiritual experience. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me coming across the principles is seeing how ordinary spirituality is. It's like seeing that it's just part of who I am. It's like, it's no more, it's like, it's just not woo-woo to me at all. It just feels like, it's like, well, of course we're spiritual. It's like that. It's not like I have to save that for when I pull off my book off the bookshelf or meditate, and then I'm spiritual. It's like, that's who we are.
Yeah.
And that for me has really landed in a way that makes things very ordinary, and it just makes things a bit more fun as well, because I don't get so, it's like people don't have to behave so much in a certain way in order for me to, you know, I sort of judge whether they're spiritual or not. It's like, no, I really get we all come from the same space, and there's something really beautiful about that spirituality within us all that just keeps shining through. And I really find that very ordinary now, rather than something I need to strive for.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. The ordinariness of it, and how, you know, and the sameness in all of us. The fact that, you know, we're not talking about something. I know when you were talking earlier about working with the young people, and you talked about what you had found was that you had a place within you that you hadn't even realized was there, but this kind of, you talked about your resilience, you talked about this space within you, and, you know, and you hadn't realized it was there. And that basically is the crux of what you do with people, is what I'm hearing. Is that right? That basically you just point them to this place that they've got already, something that they already have. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what I have eyes for is the bits that people miss themselves. So let me explain that. My older brother, he loves hunting for mushrooms, and I don't know if you've ever been out with someone who, I mean, he knows what he's looking for. Okay, so he'll look for edible fungi, and one, I think it was last year maybe, we went out looking for something called chanterelles. And chanterelles, if you look them up, they're these beautiful little sort of mushrooms, fungi. I don't know what the correct terminology is, and they're like an orange color.
Yeah.
And they're edible. And he took me out, and we went for a walk in the woods looking for chanterelles. Now, if you imagine in autumn in a beechwood, the ground is covered with orange leaves, and we're looking for orange chanterelles. It's like, I couldn't see them. And I remember we would be walking along the path, and then he'd suddenly stop and point, and I'd follow his finger, and he'd say chanterelles, and I'd think, can't see any chanterelles. I can see lots of orange and lots of leaves, but no chanterelles. And then he'd kind of get a bit closer, and then the closer his finger got, and then suddenly I go, oh, I can see them. I can see them. Now, the difference between both of us is that he's almost like trained his eyes to see them. And in doing that, he was able to point me towards them too. And he needed to point really clearly for me to have eyes for it. But then I was able to see them too. And in a way, I guess that what I see with the work that we do is that I have eyes for people's resilience, and that, you call it that okayness, that space within them that I am in awe of. And I have eyes for it when they don't see it themselves. And so, a bit like my brother, I'll keep pointing until they just go, oh, I can kind of, okay, I'll concede maybe in that moment I was resilient. but they see something in themselves, and I genuinely see it in them. So in a sense, I guess that what I have eyes for is I see that more in myself, and I see it in other people, and I point to it, and I'm able to point to it until hopefully they see it for themselves, and that's how I see my work at the moment.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I really like that. That's a really good analogy. I like that. Yeah, that's brilliant. A little while ago, you wrote an amazing blog that really, really touched something in me. And I think when I first came across these principles, I wasn't in a great place. You know, my life wasn't going the way that I wanted to go, and I wasn't in a great place. And a bit like you, I was pointed, before I came across the principles, I was pointed to a couple of other things. I did a little bit of NLP and a little bit of tapping to kind of feel better. And then a lady would talk to me about affirmations, you know, do a lot of affirmations to, you know, change how things are. And I know in my mind, I kind of thought I had I had the world mapped out in a certain way. And I thought I knew what, you know, how I needed the world to be so that I could be okay. And one thing that I have noticed about the world is it's not always you know, quite so obliging when we kind of think we know that there's something that we want or we need to be okay or anything like that. And it's very easy, I think, to come across types of self-help, which I know the principles aren't. They're absolutely not pointing towards that. But I think we can easily get lured in and trapped into this thing, you know, that we know what it is. We know what's right for us. We know what we want. And so if we do all the right things, and if we're good, and if we whatever it is, you know, the world will work the way we want it to work, and that's how we will be okay. And you wrote a beautiful, beautiful blog about the fact that you hadn't had children and you wanted a child, and this didn't turn out the way you wanted it to be. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that really touched me. That really, you know, I thought the blog was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'd be delighted to. Well, I I actually wrote it. I was inspired to write it because I'd just listened to a phone-in program on the radio, or I was listening to a phone-in program on the radio about infertility, or fertility treatment. And I think I'd heard a couple of women come on the program who were going through fertility treatment, and they were really tearful and upset. And I really felt for them. Oh dear, did I feel for them? Because it reminded me of my journey when I went through all of that stuff. And I actually phoned up the program, and I said, could I speak? Because I just wanted the women that were going through it to know that even if their worst case scenario occurred, which is they didn't have a child, it's like it was inconceivable when I was going through it to even consider that. But there was a part of me that just wanted to know I'd be okay, and that I wouldn't turn up as some lady locking herself away in a darkened room, a bit like Miss Havisham, never to see the light of day again. I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like that. But maybe it's either baby or that. I mean, that's a scary prospect. And as it was, I phoned up the program, but as it was, I didn't go on the program. But it was because I didn't go on the program that I was inspired. I just wanted to share with, I mean, particularly the journey of women, because that was obviously the journey that I knew that were going through IVF. I just wanted to say to them, look, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And so my journey with IVF, and for Stu, it was a second marriage. And when we tried for children, we weren't successful. And it resulted in, I think, around 5 years of different kinds of treatment, IVF and donor sperm. And none of them resulted in a pregnancy. I've had 7 treatments in all, and none of them resulted in a pregnancy. And it's a very kind of, I say, a cruel treatment. I mean, you're always holding out that you'll have a baby, but But at each stage, if you're going through the IVF treatment, there are different hurdles that you go through. So it's almost like you've got an obstacle course. And the obstacle course involves you inject yourself so that you create eggs. Those eggs are what's called harvested, so they're taken out of you. Then they're fertilized. And then if that's successful, some of them will start growing into embryos. And then if that's successful, 2 of those embryos will be put back inside of you. So at each stage, you never quite know if the injections will work. You don't quite know if you have actually produced any eggs. And then if you have produced eggs, you don't know if they'll be fertilized. And if they are fertilized, you don't know if the embryos are going to survive the 3 or 4 days until they put them back inside you. And then if they put them back inside you, you feel like you've gone so far down this obstacle course that the one thing now which is eluding you is the pregnancy. And yet really you're actually just at the starting. You're just starting out, you know. And so for me, I never actually became pregnant. But one of the things, as I look back on that journey, that I see so clearly now, and the one worry that I had was that I wouldn't be strong enough or resilient enough to deal with the fact that I couldn't have children. I just thought, I don't even want to go down that route to imagine it. But I'm really scared that if that is the reality I face or have to face, I don't know if I can cope with it. I really don't. I just thought I'd be an emotional wreck for the rest of my life. And then what I really saw standing in my shoes now, looking back, is that actually women that go through that process are so extraordinarily resilient at every step of the way. Now, I didn't see that resilience back then. I just saw my upset, and I saw my insecurity, and I saw my worry, and I saw everybody else having children around me. But I didn't actually see or have eyes for my own resilience in that journey. But at every step of the way, you're so resilient as you go through each step of the way. And it dawned on me when I heard that radio program. I just wanted to almost like point out that resilience to other women and say, look, guys, I know you don't maybe see it right at the moment, but you are extraordinarily resilient. And I really want you to know that, because that, you'll need that if you have a child, and you'll need that if you don't have a child. It's with you all the time. And so that was why I wrote the blog. It was just to say to women, look, you'll be okay. And if the worst thing happens in your world, which is that you don't have a child, life is different. It's a different journey. But my goodness, it's a beautiful journey. It's just different. And so that was why I wrote the blog, and hopefully that gives you a bit of background into it as well.
No, that's lovely. Thank you. And what I really, really love about these stories, and when people share their very personal stuff, because I've got a very personal story of my journey, and I know that the huge impact that has on people, because like just listening to you then, I can absolutely see the sameness in you and me. I can absolutely see that if I had have known all the time when my stuff, which was very, very different, I've got 3 children. It was a very, very different journey and very different stuff. But what I can see is my resilience was always there as well. But I didn't know that. And then, after that, I was told that I probably wouldn't be all right because of what had happened. And I'm sure, a lot of people in your situation, it would be very easy to think, oh, I won't be okay because, things didn't turn out the way that I want and everything. And I think it's really beautiful to point to people, because they might listen to your story or my particular story and kind of go, well, yeah, I get that you're resilient, if you don't have a child. I get that you're resilient if your relationship doesn't work out, whatever it is. But my stuff's different, because that's how we all feel, isn't it? Our own stuff feels very real to us. So I think it's really important when we share our stories like this, our personal things, to just see actually this resilience, this okayness, that is the core of who we are. We've all got it. And it doesn't matter, you know, whatever your personal story is, whether that story touched you or somebody else's, whatever it was, you can see across the board these people, no matter what we have, no matter what our own stuff is, whether it's depression, whether it's, you know, having a child, not having a child, losing a child, relationship stuff, across the board, what we're pointing to, this resilience is there for us. And when we get these eyes for it, when we stop and when we see, it's kind of like, wow, yeah. Like you say with your mushrooms, I loved your mushroom story. It's very much like, it's very, very easy to just see a pile of orange leaves and think, well, yeah, there's no mushrooms there. It's very easy for us to look at our stuff and say, well, no, it looks like all I've got is this rubbish that's happening to me. And yet actually, if we take a closer look, always, and that's what we've been talking about, that's what the principles point us towards, that always those little mushrooms, that resilience, they're always there.
Definitely. And I remember I was coaching somebody, and she said, she was telling me about her daughter who'd gone to university and had been depressed and had given up her university course and had come home and had, you know, had basically taken herself out of the world. You know, she'd pretty much spent a lot of time just in her bedroom and didn't want to meet anybody. And you know, for any mum, that's a big deal, isn't it? That your child is in that state of mind and stuff. And this is what I mean by pointing to those mushrooms. As long as we can extend that metaphor, let's use it. But it was like, because I just pointed out to her, the mum, a few things that she had missed. I said, look, your daughter was really finding it tough at university. And what did she do? She gave up her course and came home because she knew that's what she needed. That's resilient.
Yeah.
Your daughter, she found it really hard to go out and socialize. But do you know what she did? She stayed safe. She knew she had to eat even when she didn't want to eat, and she ate. And it sounds really small, but it was when the mother started to really see what I was pointing to, it was like a load of anxiety that she hadn't realized was there. It was like she'd been holding her breath for so long, and she could suddenly gulp in some air and go, oh, I see, she is resilient. She is resilient. I hadn't seen that. I'd just seen that it was almost like I had to tiptoe around her, and my worry was almost holding her together. And for her, it was a wake-up call to that resilience in her daughter. And for me, that's what I want people to start seeing is sometimes it might seem really small, like when we talk to people in schools and who maybe are really struggling, and yet they bring their children to school, and children that come to school and maybe they're really struggling, and they, you know, for example, they might kick off in a classroom and then they tell the teacher to F off, and then they run out of the classroom. Well, that child in running out of the classroom is preventing themselves from doing any more damage. There's a bit of them that knows that they need to take themselves away. That's resilience. And what I'm really passionate about, and going back again to young people, is if they start to glimpse that for themselves, they'll, as I understand it, they'll start to see it sooner. You know, they'll start to trust that little voice sooner. And that has got to be a good thing. Like they start to trust in that wisdom, intuition, that resilience, whatever you want to call it, that is ever present within them, even when it looks to the conventional eyes of society that they're not resilient. Well, that for me is just daft. It's like you're not looking in the right direction. So that is the bit I think that is so important to point out. You're absolutely right. You need to point out the resilience inside.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you know, as we begin to see that, Yeah, I'm just going to say that if anybody wants to ask a question, because we've been I've been really enjoying our conversation. I've been loving to listen to you. Love your metaphors; they're brilliant. If anybody would like to ask Liz a question, if there's anything, there is a chat box if you want to type it in, or you can unmute yourself, show yourself, and if you've got any questions, please do feel free. That's absolutely brilliant. We would love to hear from you. If there's anything that's coming up for you that you want clarified, anything like that, we would always welcome questions. That's always good. And in the meantime, while people are kind of thinking about whether they've got anything to ask or not, I was going to ask you something and it's completely gone.
It'll come back probably at 3 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, yeah, probably. It was something to do with the resilience we were talking about.
Hello, can I just say something, Deb?
Please do.
Hello,
Hi,
me,
Julie.
I just love the stories that you've told us, Liz, and about the resilience. And it's about our children and how we put so much pressure on them as parents. Never mind the school system. And I never saw it. I never saw any of that pressure when you're actually trying to be nice to them because you're trying to get them to conform, and you don't realize that's a real pressure for them, and then they don't do as they're told. You get caught up in your own thinking, and I never saw any of that as resilience, and I think that's just amazing. And for you to be able to go into schools and work with children now is just going to be such a fantastic thing to do. I really, really love it. But I am curious about, from the coaching aspect side of it, if it's difficult to explain these the 3 principles to people, how do you convince people that you're going to make a difference? Have you got to teacher and said, look, if you do this, you're going to make a difference to your kids? Because it's just, that's the only thing I can't get my head around, because it is something that, like you with me, it's sort of, I have had insights, but it is like you sort of pick it up by, as I've said to Deb before, by osmosis. How do you explain something that just sort of creeps up on you and just, wow, it's there? Do a tough one, I say.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, Julie, and that's probably the question in the work that I do that I'm always asking myself. Actually, how do I share something with people? I think the one thing I would say is the one thing that we've got going for us when we have this understanding is that what we've got going for us is we're pointing to how something works. And what I see is that people, they kind of grasp at some level that the language I'm using is pointing to something that they know inside. And that is the bit that kind of is the bit that they get curious about. And they often don't even know themselves what it is that they're kind of curious about. So, for example, when I talk to leaders, and I tend to be really intuitive in the moment if I'm talking to somebody, say a school leader, who will be very much wanting to, I might language it by calling it well-being, for example, well-being and resilience, but they will be often very much wanting to fix their staff and fix the children and like, yes, I want to do well-being and resilience in my school because we all need it, and then I'll do something else next week. Right. But the thing that I start to point to is I talk about it within them. So often what will happen is somebody will start a story, and I will stop their story and say, that's the bit I'm pointing to. That bit when, here's one of the things I've got going for me is teachers are very intuitive when it comes to children. Like, put them in front of a child that's maybe disruptive or worried about learning, and they are very intuitive about the best way to connect with that child. So I might point to something like that and say, you know, the way that you intuitively just know how to deal with a child. You don't need an instruction manual for it, like, because every child is different, every situation is different. And they go, yeah. I say, well, that's what we're pointing to. It's like we're pointing to you trusting that intuition in other areas of your life as well. So I might explain it in that kind of way. But what I try and do is use stuff from their world that I see that might then make sense for them to go, oh, there's something I see here that, yes, I can see that she's saying something that I want a bit more of. So that's often the way that I'll do it. Does that help at all, Julie?
Absolutely, yes, I can see that. Yeah. Use your intuition. I'm a bit frightened of that sometimes. In the past, I've been a bit thinking, is that real? Do I really know that? But yes, yeah, I see what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is really, because basically this thing that we're talking, this resilience and this place in us, that is really, you could describe it as your intuition, I suppose, if that's another way. And I think it is very much about learning to trust ourselves. And it is, like you said, as a coach, you know, when you're with these leaders, you feel intuitive, and that almost implies that there's places where you haven't got that. And it's, to me, is the understanding, as we begin to look towards the principles, we see that we have that wisdom or that intuition or that place within us always. You know, it doesn't only pop up in certain areas, and it isn't only useful to us in certain times. And I think it is, the more we have eyes for that, the more that we can trust that, and the more that we can see that, then it appears, it does pop up. We're kind of like, oh yeah, it's there as well. Oh yes, it's there as well. And then we kind of see that there is nowhere that it isn't. It's just that we thought there were places where it wasn't. Is that your experience as well? Do you kind of see that too?
Yes, I think for me, as you were speaking now, I was just thinking I trust it more and more, and maybe, Julie, that's what you were saying as well, that maybe you don't trust it sometimes, and
sometimes,
yeah, and sometimes you do, and I think the thing to say as well is that we don't actually know what the outcome is with the work that we do. So for example, I remember about a year ago, we were working with a group of middle leaders in a factory, and they didn't want to be there. Right? They genuinely didn't want to be there. This story doesn't have a happy ending, all right? We do not come out of this like everyone skipped off into the sunsets holding hands. They really didn't. And I remember at one point looking at the clock, thinking, can it go any slower? We've got a whole day with these people, and they're folded arms. They really don't want to know what we're talking about. And at this time, I was still trying to find words to describe what we were talking about. And I remember at one point, this chap, he was big, tough guy, he had tattoos all up his arms, and his arms folded. And he looked at us very matter-of-factly, and he said, "This is a load of crap." I remember it so clearly. And I remember as well, so here's intuition in action, right? And I remember as well, Stu and I went for a walk at lunchtime, and we realized neither of us voiced this at the time, but we told each other on the way home, all right? So we had another afternoon to come back to these guys. But both of us were thinking, we should just give them the money back and say, this isn't a job for us. We thought it was, but it's not a job for us. We were really thinking, you know, and that's wisdom coming through. That's, you know, that's insight, like maybe this isn't for us. Maybe this is a job that wasn't for us. And I remember thinking, I just got to trust wisdom is going to come to me to kind of help engage these guys in the afternoon. We went to Tesco's. We got our sandwiches. We walked back. It was like the searchlight in my head was looking for wisdom. I couldn't see it. It was like, there is no wisdom in here today. I remember walking into the kitchen where one of the lads was making a cup of tea. And I thought, I'll just see how he's getting on. And I said, how is the training for you this morning? And he looked at me. This wasn't the one that said it was a load of crap. This was another one. He looked at me and he said, honest truth, he said, it's really slow. And I thought, oh, heck, they hate us. They hate us. Wisdom, where are you? And I walked into the training room and I was still going, wisdom, where are you? What am I going to do next? And I remember looking at them and they were all looking at me around this boardroom table with these eyes. And I just remember in that moment, as I opened my mouth, I pulled up a chair and I said, can we just talk about the training this morning? I just want to get a bit of feedback about it. And I remember we went around the room and people were being honest. But what I began to realize is that whilst there were some voices in there that really, weren't getting it, there were a few voices that were seeing something. They were seeing the simplest thing, that actually slowing down and being quieter, and actually, rather than rushing around like headless chickens, wasn't such a bad thing. So in that moment, it's like we found a way through the day as best we could, as authentically as we could, with both the people that wanted to be there and the people that didn't want to be there. And you could say that wisdom, for me, it was really clear that I didn't know what to say until I was in that moment and it just came out of my mouth. And it didn't come out of my mouth, and it wasn't like a Dead Poets Society moment where suddenly they all lifted me on their shoulders and took me out because we were so wonderful as trainers. It genuinely wasn't like that. But at some level, we had made some connection with some people. And sometimes we don't know what it is that we are there or who we are there to speak to, but we just have to trust that there is something going on that probably we have no idea about, and that at some level it touched someone somewhere, and that was maybe the job we had in that room on that day. So wisdom, it's an elusive thing, and it certainly doesn't kind of give you a winning hand, and you like I say, you don't have a happily ever after ending. But what it does always do, and this is the thing I test out, and it's never let me down, it will always show me the next step. It always shows me the next step. And that next step might not be the outcome I had in mind, but it will show me the next step. So that's how I see it.
That's brilliant. And I kind of think that's a great theme of the evening, really, that things don't always turn out the way we think they should. And very often, I wrote a blog a little while ago that was the title of it was "Some Things Aren't Ours to Know." And it looks to me, we're always where we should be. We're always hearing and saying, what we should be. Wisdom is always running through this system and always running through us. And even if in our, the part we play in life, we look at it and think, well, how can that be right? You do a training and it didn't work out. How can that ever be right? But it is just sometimes. And one thing I've noticed as well is very often it's, I've sat in where people have been talking very, very deeply about the principles, and it felt to me like nothing really happened. And then a throwaway comment from someone and something really shifts in my mind. So we don't know what people are hearing and when they're hearing and what. And it just looks to me, if we can just know that resilience, that okayness is in us, even when we're giving trainings, that to us, we're looking, like, oh my gosh, this isn't working the way that I had in mind. This isn't turning out the way that I thought it should. And that goes across the board, with what you were talking about earlier about having a child or not having a child, doing a training, whatever situation you're in. I think if we can see that this okayness, and it's not dependent on things turning out the way we want them to turn out. If we see that those two things aren't connected, things don't have to turn out the way we think that they should or we want them to.
And that for me, Deborah, is probably a really beautiful way of putting it, is that I really see that. Whereas before this understanding, a training like that, I would have probably considered giving up as a coach, and I was rubbish and I was hopeless at everything. But it's like I know now deep in me, it's like the core of who I am, that it doesn't, of course I want people to enjoy our training. That's obviously why I do what I do. But my ability to deliver good training has no relationship to who I am, who I truly am at the core of myself. It's like they're two separate things. And I really get that now. It's like, it doesn't matter for me what I genuinely don't want crappy things to happen. Don't get me wrong. But I know that whatever happens, I will be able to take the next step and the next step and the next step, because I know that is at the core of who I am. And that never leaves me, you, or anybody. And that's it's one of my clients said once, and I love this. He said, it's a little bit, he said, like setting off to sea in a ship that you absolutely know cannot be sunk. So, and I love that, because I thought, yeah, I'd prefer not to be in stormy weather. I'd really prefer that. But even when I'm in stormy weather and I'm feeling ill and I wish it would stop, I know that the ship is safe. I know the core of who I am is safe, is my true self, cannot be touched, which means I can go through any weather or any terrain and be okay. And isn't that good to know for me? And isn't that good to share with others? Which is why I want to share this with young people. Yeah.
A massive yes. That is brilliant. I kind of just glanced at the time. I could keep talking all night. Yeah. But it's 8:05, so I'm aware of taking up your time as well. But so if has anyone got anything else, any burning questions that they want to ask Liz? And in the meantime, before anyone does, do you want to share again where if people want to know more about you, hear more about what you do, what you're up to, get involved maybe with this thing that you've got going on with the young people? That sounds absolutely brilliant. How can people find you and get hold of you?
Yeah, the best way to do it is go to coachingconnect.co.uk, coachingconnect.co.uk. And what you'll find on there, we ran a conference recently, and Deborah was one of the speakers. And each speaker had 15 minutes to speak, a bit like TED Talks, if you've come across TED Talks. And you'll find all of the videos up on that website. That's quite a new addition, actually, in the last couple of weeks. So it's really worth just exploring and being inspired. And you can contact me via email on that website. It's info@coachingconnect.co.uk.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And if anyone forgets that I have put it on the Facebook page, and it's also in the emails that I put out. And if anyone knows me and wants to ask me, I can put you in contact with Liz. That's no problem, because I mean, I was honoured to be a speaker at that event. It was an absolutely amazing event, and some of the speakers there were brilliant. And it's quite a task, actually, to kind of condense something down to 15 minutes and get it across. But there was some amazing, that would be a great way to get a flavour of all the different areas that, the principles were talked about in many different ways that day. So that was brilliant. Well, thank you to everybody who took the time to be here with us tonight. That was brilliant. I've had a great conversation. It was really good to talk to you, Liz, really good to catch up. And nobody has kind of come forward with anything or put their hand up or anything like that. So we'll assume that nobody wants to add anything here tonight. But as I say, if anyone does want to contact Liz, Coaching Connect, and if you forget that, you can always get in contact with me. All right, then. Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Liz. Thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody, and thank you very much, all those Cliffs, for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Deb.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. I don't know what I've done now.